Good morning, everybody. Sorry about those audio issues. We are up and running now. Thank you so much for joining our today's webinar. Today we're going to be discussing the world after the 600 megahertz auction and kind of explain to you what happened, what's going to happen, and how you can stay up to date and current with your wireless systems. My name is Cheryl, and I'm joined as always today by my co-host, Mr. Chris Lyons. And we have three very special guests today. As you can see on the slide, we have Mark Bruner, who's our government guy, which more formally is known as the Vice President of Corporate and Government Relations. We have Edgar Ryle, the technology guy, better known as the Director of Technology and Advanced Development, and Todd Preddy, the rebate guy, who is our Product Marketing Manager. And they're going to kind of help us wade through what the world's going to be like now that the incentive auction has closed and what that means moving forward. But before we get into that, just a few items of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, so it will be available as an archive sometime within the next week or so after the webinar. You can go to shure.com/training to access it. You can also access it through our blog. It's a great place to catch up if you forget anything or if you want to refer any colleagues to. There's just a ton of great learning there at shure.com/training. And then second of all, as we go through the webinar, please feel free to type in any questions you have. We will answer questions at the end of the session. If you don't see the question pane, just look for that small toolbar with an orange box with a white arrow in it. Click in it, and that should maximize your question pane. So that wraps up all the boring stuff. Let's get into the interesting stuff. Take it away, Chris.
And my, how times have changed when we consider spectrum the interesting stuff. I mean, seriously, God knows, it seems like this would have been a real sleeper of a topic. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody, and thanks to Mark, Todd, and Edgar for being here to provide the real nuts and bolts information. All three of these guys have been living and breathing different aspects of the spectrum situation for years now. So let's get right into it, because I know we're going to have a lot of questions, so I want to leave plenty of time for that at the end. So here we go. All right, so today we'll talk a little bit about the auction results, how the new UHF TV band is going to look, the timeline for the transition as all the TV stations move around. There are a few new operating rules that affect wireless microphones. And then lastly, we'll wind up talking with a little bit about what Shure's been doing and rebate news and that sort of thing. So let's jump right in here. So first of all, some people have wondered, who bought what, how much was raised, and so forth. And it's really not that important from our perspective. But Mark, this was kind of a surprise as to the who more than the how much, right?
Yes, exactly, Chris.
T-Mobile was sort of the surprise big bidder here. No one really expected T-Mobile to be a big player. We thought it'd be AT&T and Verizon and so forth. But T-Mobile and Dish were the largest spectrum auction winners. Comcast was number 3, U.S. Cellular number 4, and then a handful of small kind of regional cellular players made up the rest. Overall, brought in about $19.3 billion. The way that money gets dispersed is the 175 stations that volunteered to move their channels or go off the air or share channels get to split up a big chunk of it. About 10 billion or 7 billion or so goes actually into the U.S. Treasury. And from that, we believe a big chunk of it will also go to the public safety community to pay for some 21st century radio systems for public safety. And then a little moving van there is the chunk that's going to pay the relocation costs of the stations that have to move. There's some money set aside for that, and then a small sliver set off for auction expenses. So really the news is that 175 stations volunteered to either share a channel with somebody else or just go off the air entirely. But Edgar, how many stations are actually literally going off the air? Do you know roughly if it's at a lot? I think it's the answer I've heard somewhere was around a dozen. So I think the majority is really going to be people sharing channels, right?
Well, they have the option to share channels. They also have the option to move channels to a less desirable channel. So a few are moving to the VHF band. So that pretty much accounts for most of it.
Right. But from our perspective, this is all sort of water under the bridge. We're more concerned with the how and the when than we are with the who. So let's talk about that. So in the U.S., the popular wireless mic frequency ranges have been for a long time VHF, UHF, a little bit in the 900 megahertz range and the 1.9 gigahertz range, and then some actually now up in the 2.4 gigahertz range. But those are sort of the big five. There are also some other miscellaneous frequency ranges here and there, but most of those are undesirable for one reason or another. Either the antenna length would be way too long or something of that sort, or they're just too small. So that's the way things have been for a long time. Before the transition, the UHF TV band has been from 470 megahertz up to 698. And now the transition will, after the transition, the TV band will stop at 614 megahertz, and then the portion from 614 to 698 will be used mostly by mobile data providers, like we saw in the previous slide. Now here's where we start getting into the real fun stuff. So first of all, the 13 cities. Edgar, what's the significance of those 13 cities? I think a lot of people might not be aware of what 13 cities for public safety is all about there.
So a number of years ago, the FCC made frequencies available principally at the low end of the UHF TV range for public safety use in 13 specific cities across the United States. It's actually the case that only 11 of those have been implemented, and there are 2 others that are close to Canada, our neighbor to the north, which have not actually been taken up by public safety, but they're still not available to wireless microphone users. So we're talking channels between channels 14 and 20.
Right. And it's only selected channels in certain cities. So for instance, if you're in Boston, 14 and 16 are the ones you got to worry about. The others you can still go ahead and use.
Exactly.
Channel 37 has always been kind of quote, a special channel. What's been unique about that one? Who gets to use that?
So channel 37 was principally used by the radio astronomy research community. And in recent times, the FCC opened it to a limited set of other users. So they did make it available for use by wireless medical telemetry devices. Those things used to operate in various other channels, and they've been trying to collect that in channel 37. So that's shared.
Right. But not by wireless microphones.
But not by wireless microphones, correct.
Yep. So then we get into the fun stuff, which is what happens in the upper reaches there. First, we've got that guard band, and that's a very small slice that separates channel 37 from the mobile broadband transmissions. And this will be shared by licensed and unlicensed wireless mic users. But there are some restrictions there. So you can only use a power level of 20 milliwatts as opposed to 50 or 250, depending who you are, down in the regular part of the TV band. And it's small, but the good news is there's no Whitespace device traffic in there allowed. So there aren't any Whitespace devices, period, as of yet, but there won't be any in that part of the spectrum either. Then when we get into the duplex gap, which is the sort of space between the uplink and downlink portions of the mobile broadband, there it's divided up a little differently. Mark, maybe you want to address kind of how and why they split it up this way.
Yes, Chris. Well, the duplex gap offered an opportunity for the Commission to actually allocate some exclusive spectrum primarily to meet the needs of mobile journalism and breaking news. This was a important aspect of the post-auction band plan, particularly for the NAB. And so what the Commission decided there was in that 11 megahertz duplex gap, 1 megahertz on the lower end will be an exclusive guard band, so nothing will transmit in there. In the 4 megahertz above that, licensed wireless microphone operators will have exclusive access to that spectrum. Lower power levels than normal, but the 20 milliwatt power limit pretty much applies throughout all of these gaps and guard bands. Above that, it was determined the best use would be shared use for wireless microphones and Whitespace devices. So licensed, unlicensed, and Whitespace devices are able to use the top 6 megahertz of the duplex gap.
Now, I'm sure the question's going to come up later, so we might as well just answer it now while we're looking at this graph. So what if I currently have a wireless mic that tunes across both the lower TV band there, say from channel 35, and up into that black area labeled mobile broadband? can I just say, oh, okay, no problem, I'll just tune it to one of the lower frequencies there and not go into the upper range? What's the fine print on the regulations there?
Well, any microphone that tunes into the auction spectrum will need to be retired ultimately by the end of the transition period. As you'll get to coming up, Chris, there is the ability to continue to use those microphones through the transition period, as long as you're not creating interference to mobile broadband services that commence operations.
Right, so we've got some overlap period now between now and when the stations have actually finished all their moves, and actually that's probably a good slide to go to. So the timetable for all this is happening in stages, and the FCC's divided this up into 10 phases. Some cities, especially larger cities, are actually divided, like Chicago, across a couple of phases. So Chicago stations are either in phase 6 or phase 8. But you see at the dark blue at the sort of end of each of those bars, that's sort of the beginning and the end of the moving period, I guess you'd call it. So the stations are going to really have to start moving by the beginning of that transition period, and then they've got to be finished with their move and testing at the end of that transition period. I guess the question is, are there situations or circumstances where stations might move earlier than that? Do we know that?
I think that's undetermined at this time, Chris, but we're certainly trying to keep a close monitoring on that if folks actually go in advance of the schedule. It probably should be noted that this was a very well-calculated transition plan with the NAB working in conjunction with the FCC. So it's too early to tell whether some stations may move ahead of their schedule.
Mm-hmm. And also, there may be cities, there probably are somewhere, where there aren't any TV stations occupying the 600 megahertz band, where it's already open. And so one of those mobile broadband providers, T-Mobile or whoever, could perhaps offer service earlier than the transition schedule on the paper here. We'll talk a little bit later about what that means for wireless mic users. So, for instance, let's look at an example here right in Chicago. So right now in Chicago, you've got 2 channels at the bottom reserved for public safety. The red one's there. The black ones are where the TV stations are. Channel 37 is reserved for mobile astronomy, and mobile medical use. And then we've only got 1 occupied channel in the VHF band, so that's still pretty open. Once they finish the transition here in Chicago, it'll shrink down to looking like this. So we'll have pretty much channel 16 being open, 29, 30, and 31, and then 36 in the UHF band. And then the rest will be occupied by TV stations. Some of those channels will even be shared by multiple stations. We don't really care for our purposes. But you notice the VHF band, still only 1 occupied channel there. So there's a good amount of spectrum there, still 5 channels in the UHF band and 6 channels in the VHF band. So that's quite a bit of spectrum to work with for people that are operating wireless microphones. So let's talk about who needs to move and when do they need to move. So those 2 black rectangles on one of our previous slides are really the points that are at issue here. So if my wireless mic can be tuned if it overlaps those bands, 616 to 653 or 663 to 698 megahertz, then I'm definitely going to need to move it out of those ranges and retire that one before the end of the transition period. And as a practical matter, if my wireless system operates on an active TV channel that wasn't active before and now it is, if all the channels that I can tune to are active, then I'm going to, for a practical matter, have to move too. So Mark, here's where the question of when comes up. When do people have to get out of here? When's their drop dead date?
Well, Chris, as you've identified here on the slide, July 13, 2020 is the end of the Commission's stated 39-month transition period for the entire TV band to be rescoped, and for the mobile providers to have access to their auction spectrum. But part of the report and order indicates that wireless microphone operators, it is incumbent on them not to interfere with licensed services, meaning mobile broadband, when that commences operations in their location. So if your wireless microphones are in these bands 616 to 653, 663 to 698, and during that transition period, a mobile provider fires up their network within those frequency ranges, and it's incumbent on you to tune away from it or not to interfere from it throughout this 39-month period.
There'll be limited circumstances in which the mobile providers might fire up and do what are called site commissioning tests in advance, and we should be notified by the FCC when that occurs, if it does. But those will be limited circumstances.
Right. And we can certainly put notices of that on our incentive auction resource page so that, if people see that, oh, such and such network is going live in Dallas, then I need to make sure I'm getting out of there. And as a practical matter, those people who are operating wireless mics where one of these networks has started to fire up and do some testing are probably going to experience interference.
That's a distinct possibility, yes.
So that's definitely one of the things you should be on the lookout for, is if you suddenly start having a lot of dropouts for no apparent reason, the system always worked fine before, and you're in the 600 megahertz band, that would probably be a great time to do a scan and do a little research and make sure that whether or not a network is live where you are. So let's see, there are also some miscellaneous rule changes that were kind of bundled into this whole auction transition process. One of them is the question of 2 TV channels being reserved for wireless mics, because for about the last, 3 years maybe, the FCC had reserved 2 TV channels, one below 37, one above 37, exclusively for wireless microphone use, no Whitespace devices. And after this auction band plan became final, which would stop essentially at channel 37, they said, well, we don't really have room for that anymore. It's going to be pretty densely packed down below, and we don't really see a reason why wireless mics should be on a separate channel, especially since broadcast users can use some of that exclusive licensed spectrum higher up. So there won't be any channels reserved for wireless mics anymore, but still plenty of open channels in most places. The other one, co-channel operation. Edgar, this is one that a lot of people get confused about. What does this mean when we're talking about co-channel operations 70 miles from an antenna?
So under the previous FCC rules, there were hard limits in terms of how far you were supposed to be away from an operational broadcast station, and you were not supposed to operate if you were any closer than that distance. So in most parts of the country, that's 70 miles. The thing about that is it didn't take into account a lot of other factors, like how much power the TV station was using, how high the antenna was, whether they were using a directional pattern or not. So in many cases, you could be within 70 miles of a station and you wouldn't cause any interference at all because there was no signal, there was no coverage there. So the commission revisited those rules, and now they're going on a planning basis like they do for Whitespace devices, which allows you to operate co-channel within up to about 4 kilometers from the station's contour.
Right.
So that's an improvement. It opens up a lot more usable spectrum for wireless microphones.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we've got a slide in a little bit to talk about the TV Whitespace databases, which are the best way to get an accurate reading of what is the coverage pattern of TV stations in your area and what spectrum really is available to you or not. And speaking of the databases, one thing that did change slightly is these databases that tell the Whitespace devices where they can operate. We're also going to be telling wireless mic users what channels were available. And originally the FCC had said, well, if you're doing a big event or something like that, we suppose that wireless mic users could register in the database so that the database would temporarily tell Whitespace devices, don't use this channel, Joe's doing an event. They decided later that that would be something limited to licensed users only, and that they might have to pay for that registration privilege. We don't know, that hasn't been finalized yet. But so for now, unlicensed users won't be able to get into that database to register. It will be exclusively licensed users.
Correct.
And speaking of licensing, that's always a fun topic. So talk about, maybe Edgar, you've been dealing with licensing for a long time. How is this changing now as far as who's eligible for a license?
Well, there was a lot of discussion about that. In the past, it's really been limited to a very exclusive group of people who had eligibility to actually apply for and get a wireless microphone license. As you can see on the slide, primarily broadcasters, film and TV production companies. But the FCC has expanded this now to basically make it an option for anyone who is using 50 or more devices, and that could be wireless microphones, in-ear monitors, and so on a regular basis. You could apply for and get a license, and really that's a very helpful thing in a lot of situations. As you pointed out, it'll allow you to register with the database for protection from interference from Whitespace devices. It'll also give you access to the exclusive license-to-only segment in the duplex gap. So I think that's something we would definitely encourage people to consider, especially if they are falling into that category.
Right. And it also gives them a little bit more flexibility to operate on an occupied TV channel. If they're indoors, let's say at a concert hall or something that's a big concrete warehouse type thing like the United Center in Chicago, let's say, where there's very little, if any, television broadcast signal getting in there. So then the chances of you interfering with someone are pretty nil. So if you can measure this TV signal strength at less than minus 84 dBm, you can actually operate on that active TV channel. Although, that's something that you need to be able to measure, and not all users have that type of scanning and measuring equipment at their disposal, but maybe a professional touring sound company does. And we talked about registering in the Whitespace database and getting protection from Whitespace devices. That's not something that happens 24/7. That's something that happens for the time and location of your event. So you basically tell the FCC, we're doing a show on this date from 10 a.m. till midnight in this particular, latitude and longitude, and that's when the protection runs. If you're interested in looking up how to apply for a license, it's not expensive. It's $165, and that's one license that covers all of your wireless devices, so it's just one form. The bad news is it's a really big monster of a form with lots of spaces that aren't really relevant to wireless mic users, so there's plenty of things to wade through. But if you want to check it out, you can download Form 601 from the FCC's website and give it a look. And while we're talking about Whitespace devices, they can operate on any VHF or UHF channel, but they get their instructions from the Whitespace database. So they don't just pick a channel at random, the database tells them what to do. And as far as power levels go, this is one thing that did change slightly. Originally, fixed Whitespace devices that are mounted on a pole were operating generally at higher powers, but they can now operate on a channel next to an occupied channel if they throttle down their power to about 40 milliwatts, which was what portable devices were doing. At the same token, they can transmit at up to 10 watts if they're out in virtually unpopulated, sparsely populated areas, in rural areas, to provide internet service in areas where cabling's not practical. So the databases, if you want to check out some of these databases, there are several that have been approved. LS Telecom, Google, KeyBridge, Spectrum Bridge, iConnective, Microsoft. They're approved, but it doesn't seem that theirs is active at the moment. I think the one that's most user-friendly and easy to understand is the Spectrum Bridge site. So you may want to check that one out and just punch in your address or your location and see what TV channel access it tells you about. But we should point out that the Whitespace databases are giving you today's picture. They're telling you what the situation is now, because they're tied to the FCC's databases of station licenses. So what has Shure been doing while all this has been going on? Well, we have slowly been cleaning out our inventory of our roster of wireless products. Todd, you've been working on this for a long time to make sure that we have slowly gotten rid of everything that operates in the 600 megahertz band. So is there anything still in our line at 600 megahertz? I don't think there is.
No, we proactively started, discontinuing bands that operated in ranges that were, even before we knew the outcome of the auction, that seemed, very likely to be impacted. We started proactively taking those offline, and yeah, to this point, we don't currently offer anything for sale that operates in any of the newly, crowned 600 megahertz spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And then at the same time, we've added some new frequency bands. We're back in VHF, which we did not offer for many years. We've also got other options outside the TV band, like 900 megahertz, 1.9 gigahertz, 2.4 gigahertz. So regardless of what your situation is, you have a lot of different choices now. And then, of course, the glitz and glamour are some of the fancier technologies like interference detection and avoidance, where the system actually can figure out if it's being interfered with and automatically change to a new frequency. We've got a couple of different products that are using that technology that was originally developed in the Axient system. And I think maybe, Edgar, you can talk a little bit about the spectral efficiency. I think this is something people forget about. This has gotten a lot better in the last 10 years, hasn't it?
It sure has, Chris. It used to be back in the day that you could only hope to put maybe 6 or 8 wireless systems, wireless audio channels in a 6 megahertz TV channel. The newer systems, both the analog and digital systems that we sell, you can pack up to 17 of those in a 6 megahertz TV channel. And if you have a system that supports HD mode, we call high density mode, you can place up to 47 systems in a TV channel. Now, this is not for every application or every situation, because it does involve a power reduction, which affects the distance that the system can work. But it's extremely effective for people who need a lot of channels packed in certain circumstances.
Yeah. And just to illustrate how that might shake out in a real world situation, so here in Chicago, if you were to just use the standard mode on a ULXD system, if you took advantage of both the VHF and our 2 UHF bands, you could get 94 systems to operate in that spectrum. And that's in standard mode. So that's, 20, 40 milliwatts, whatever the standard power is. If you go into and it should change, perhaps. There we go. If you go into high density mode, you can get 406 systems to work in Chicago. Now that's, of course, if nobody else is using anything, but still, that's a lot of wireless systems. And if you buy 400 systems, I think we could probably send you a free T-shirt. There'd probably be some sort of prize for an order that big, I believe. So, of course, you're probably wondering, if you haven't ever used Wireless Workbench, how do you know how many systems you can get? Well, Wireless Workbench is a great tool. If you haven't tried it out, you should download it. It's free. It lets you analyze and project and do all kinds of what-if scenarios, like what if I put this many systems of this type and so on, frequency ranges and so forth. It really helps both with the analysis and the setup and the coordination and the monitoring of your system. So definitely try that out. If people are buying new systems, which we know that some people will be, for the last 6 months, Todd has been slowly tearing all his hair out, coordinating this huge rebate program. So how does this work, Todd?
Yeah, so I think as you alluded to, given all these recent changes related to the 600 megahertz spectrum, we recently rolled out a new wireless rebate program. And, from a high level, how it works is, first you buy new qualifying Shure wireless systems. Then you send in the same number of 600 megahertz eligible systems from Shure or from anybody else. This enables you to a rebate of up to $500 per channel, depending on what you purchased. And we're going to go through some of those details in the next slide. But a couple key things to note, though. The rebate program, we recently kicked it off about a month ago. It runs through the end of April of 2018. For a lot more information, including how to check if your product is eligible, the specific rebate terms and conditions, you really want to go to www.shure.com/wireless rebate. There's all kinds of great, useful information. There's drop downs in there so you can select the product you have. There's drop downs from competitors as well. So really trying to help you hone in on how much money back you potentially can get from a new purchase.
Right. And there's the list of what's eligible.
Yeah, and so depending on the level of new product you purchase, there are varying rebate amounts. One of the key things I want to call out is that in the right-hand side there, the brand new Axion Digital line that we just unveiled last month at the NAB show in Las Vegas, that will be eligible for the rebate. We're planning that to begin shipping later on this summer, but we want to make sure that folks are aware that's coming and it's eligible. Also, a key part of the whole rebate trade-in process is it's a system consists of what we call, the rebate is on a per-channel basis, and that is a receiver and a transmitter, or similar with PSM, and any number of receiver channels, we need a corresponding number of transmitter channels. So just something to be aware of as you're going through the process. It's not just components only, so we're not just sort of coming back with receivers or transmitters, but we are looking at a full system there as part of the rebate process.
Because there are some multi-channel transmitters and receivers nowadays, so it's the number of channels, not the number of boxes.
Yes,
really.
thank you.
Yep. And so if you're buying, then the question comes up, well, what frequency range should I buy? And the way to figure that out is to first check what's the current TV channel layout, because that'll tell you the stations that are involved. And you want to go to our wireless frequency finder on our website. You go to support and then tools, and you'll see Shure Wireless Frequency Finder. Put in your address. Better to put a street address than just a zip code or a city, because the contours are now a little bit more finer resolution than they used to be, so things can change across a city. And then that'll give you a list. You click on unavailable to see which channels are being used, so they're unavailable for wireless mics. Like, for instance, this is Madison, Wisconsin here. So there's the list of stations and their channel assignments. Then there's a new document that you can get on the FCC website called the Post-Auction Technical Parameters List, which gives you a list of all the stations and what channels they're going to be moving to. So that would tell you, okay, channel 8's moving to 36, and so on and so forth. The key here is to remember that this list is by city and state. So, for instance, in Madison, Wisconsin, a couple of those stations are actually listed under other cities. I believe there's one that's actually licensed under Janesville, for instance, and I believe the second one, WREX, actually is out of Rockford, Illinois. Correct. So if there seem to be a couple missing under Madison or whatever your city is, think about whatever cities are right around you. They might be listed there. And where do you get these documents? Well, the FCC recently redid their website and made it much easier to navigate. You go to that address there in the yellow, and you'll be able to find all kinds of information about the auction. And if you click on transition data files, you can find that post-auction technical list document, as well as lots of other things if you want to read the fine print. So, having said all that, that's the fast summary here. So now, questions. And we should emphasize we've got people available by phone, by email, and so forth, ready to talk about the rebate itself, technical support, which product you should buy, all those things. But Cheryl, what kinds of questions are people asking?
We've got a lot. Okay, first question. I work for a large resort in the U.S. in Missouri, and I have a quantity of 3 of the SLX4 in the L band. I'm in a country, not a city. Is it still mandatory for me to replace them?
That's a great question. Is that a Todd question? If you're in the L band, but you're in the country and not the city, or is that a regulatory question? I think it's a regulatory question, really.
Yes, well, regardless of location, doesn't absolve you from complying with the new band plan. So we would have to say to that inquiry that, yes, you will need to pay attention to this transition. It remains to be seen where the wireless carriers will put their emphasis for early deployment, however, of their operations. And as you can imagine, that's probably more likely in more densely populated urban areas. But nevertheless, at the end of the transition period, it will be a requirement for all wireless microphone users to cease operations in any of the auction spectrum.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Next question. How do you think this is going to affect our neighbors to the north in Canada?
Ooh, good question. Yeah. What's going on in Canada, Edgar?
So Industry Canada Spectrum Management has been tracking the FCC Incentive Auction and has worked quite closely with the FCC on this issue, and they intend to eventually implement something similar up there. That hasn't happened yet. But yeah, if you live in Canada, first of all, it's a more sparsely populated country, with the exception of some major population centers that are, for the most part, close to the U.S. border, and therefore, especially need to be well coordinated with those cities in the U.S. But I don't think we're going to see the severity of spectrum shortage in Canada that we will see in certain parts of the United States, just because in general they have a lot more open channels right now. But yes, our understanding is that Canada does intend to conduct an auction similar to ours at some point in the future, and they will probably consolidate and follow a similar band plan to what we have done here.
As far as this transition is concerned, it would be important for folks who do live near the border to be monitoring TV station assignment changes that are within their proximity across the border in the U.S.
Right. In fact, that transition document has some Canadian stations on the list because they're close to the U.S. border.
Correct.
So that kind of leads into the next question about, that transition document will talk about when the cities are going to go online. There's a lot of questions about when do I know when my city is going to be affected?
Yeah, there's, if it's not in that phase transition document, there is a separate document, the post-auction transition, there's a separate phase document that lists every station and what phase they're assigned to. Because like I said, in Chicago, they kind of divided them up. Most of the stations are in phase 6, a handful are in phase 8. And that may be because it's like a Chinese puzzle where they got to move one station out of a channel because another one is moving into that channel. So it is complicated, but yeah, you'll want to keep track of that.
Okay.
So for anyone who's looking for what is happening in their city and when, we encourage you to consult that resource on the FCC site that Chris mentioned earlier.
And I believe the first phase includes mostly cities in the West. I think Salt Lake City was on there, Fresno, California, Reno, Nevada, and a handful of other cities in that area. So you guys are going to, maybe Seattle, are going to have to do it first.
So we talked a lot about mics, but what about in-ear monitor systems?
Good question. In-ear monitors are technically, as far as the FCC is concerned, the same thing.
Same thing.
So the same rules apply, same regulations, same moves have to happen, right? No exceptions or differences there.
Correct.
That's correct.
Okay. Question here about firmware to existing wireless systems. Will we be doing any firmware upgrades for those systems to maybe limit them if they're still in part of the spectrum that's available?
Yes, Cheryl, we've certainly looked into that potential, and we're exploring that possibility for some of the systems. I would say to those users who would be interested in that possibility, just stay tuned here with Shure over the coming months.
Great, thank you. Okay, the frequency finder tool, that's up to date with where the new TV stations are going to be blacked out on?
No.
Okay.
Our frequency finder is required to pull data from one of the approved TV Whitespace databases. I believe our partnership is with Keybridge Global. So and those databases reflect the spectrum as it is today.
Correct.
At this point, there is not any sort of online tool where you can enter your location and find out what are things going to look like after the transition. Perhaps one of the databases will start to offer that, or perhaps the FCC will itself. But at this point, it's a bit of a manual operation. But hopefully there will be some more automated tool.
Okay. Is there a way to know when mobile companies will begin testing their frequencies without just waiting for interference?
To Chris's statement, just previously, we would anticipate that that information about commencement of operations will be forthcoming from the Commission, either in documents they publish on their site and maintain and update, or via the databases themselves.
And a great way to stay in touch with that sort of announcements is the FCC publishes a document called the Daily Digest, which is just a couple of pages full of announcements, 90% of which have nothing to do with us, but if there is some sort of announcement or a regulation pending, you'll find a notice of it there.
Okay. Will Shure be expanding its VHF offerings, and what do you guys see about the future of VHF?
Todd, that's a great question for you. Which products are we marketing now in VHF, and do we think that'll grow?
So we currently offer our ULXD and our QLXD systems in VHF band. I can tell you that as we've shown over the last couple of years, we've continued to sort of diversify where our products offer or where our products operate within, VHF, 1.9 gigahertz, 2.4 gigahertz. We're going to continue to look at all opportunities to make sure our end users ultimately have the best use case possible with Shure products. So I would say to continue to stay tuned on that front as well. But we're looking at everything and trying to take as much proactive action as we can. So I would keep an eye out for what's next from Shure.
And the QLXD and ULXD in VHF, those have only been on the market for 6 months maybe? Not that
about
long.
that, yeah. It's very recent introduction.
So we'll see how those go, and if people gravitate to those and really start making use of them, then maybe we'll duplicate that in other products too.
Okay. What about those guard bands? Is Shure going to be releasing any wireless systems specifically for those frequencies, available frequencies?
Yes, well, in the guard bands, we're also awaiting some technical rules related to operation in those bands. And those we anticipate shortly. They were all part of the incentive auction report and order, and they're in a process now called the reconsideration process, where folks have offered their reply inputs to FCC proposals there. So we'll need to see exactly how the ink dries on that before we can specify new products that will operate precisely in those guard bands and duplex gap.
Okay. Can you provide some examples of Whitespace devices currently being used, and why do you think it's not being used more widely?
That's a great question. Edgar, you want to talk
There
about
are not many. However, the ones that we're aware of that have been out there for a while mostly pertain to things like data backhaul. And there was an electronic signage device intended primarily for use indoors in locations like hotels and convention centers and that sort of thing. I would not be surprised if there was a significant expansion in Whitespace devices in the years to come, because of the fact that the Commission did make a number of accommodations in this proceeding, and in particular, the Whitespace devices are getting access to channel 37, which is nationwide, which I think will turn out to be a fairly useful allocation for those devices, and also, of course, the upper 6 megahertz in the duplex gap. So I think we'll see Internet of Things and some other types of devices coming in the years to come. But up to now, it's been fairly quiet.
Okay. All right. This person wants us to look into our crystal ball and asks if we see 500 megahertz going away next.
Good question. I mean, first it was 700 megahertz, then 600 megahertz. Do we think we're done? I mean, when I look at the map, at least in major cities, it doesn't look like there's much more room, but anything's possible, right?
Well, we prefer not to speculate on a future auction in UHF. I think it's important to understand that the mobile companies are being given a wide variety of opportunities to deploy new technologies. Some of you may have heard about 5G. The frequency bands allocated for this are much higher. They will unlikely be in the UHF band. So I think as the mobile providers are given a bigger variety of opportunities, the desire to take more out of UHF starts to diminish.
Okay. What is the penalty for someone interfering or using wireless in the mobile bands after 2020, and how would they even get caught?
Well, I won't speak to the penalty because that actually would vary, I think.
Correct.
But depending on the duration of the violation and the extent of it. But how they would get caught is most likely the result of the mobile provider
Correct.
analyzing the environment in the geography in which they have deployed the network. We've seen cases of this where the mobile providers have driven around in their areas where they're beginning to deploy cell sites and done scans and identified operations that were on their spectrum. So you're more likely to get identified by Verizon, T-Mobile, or AT&T than the FCC. However, it's a quick hop for them reporting that violation, and then you're likely to get a letter.
What usually drives that is they start to get complaints from customers about dropped calls and issues, and then they'll send out a truck to investigate that. So the FCC is a complaint-driven organization, and they don't have a vast army of people to go out and sniff the spectrum all over the country. It's just an enormous task. So Mark is correct. These things will typically come from the wireless providers.
Mm-hmm. And as far as amounts of fines, there is a document or a section of the FCC rules that specifically deals with fines. There's not a specific one that I know of for wireless microphones specifically, but I think it's somewhere in the section 1 of FCC rules, the administrative parts. There's a whole list of different fines for different things if you want to go look
Basically,
them up.
it's unauthorized operation if you're operating on spectrum or with inappropriate technical parameters, too much power or whatever. And the fines vary depending on whether it was willful and repeated. So if it was an isolated incident, the fee would be less than if you did something bad and continued to do it for a period of a number of weeks or months or years. So I think that the fines are there to deter people from breaking the law, but it will depend on the individual circumstances.
But they're not $100 fines.
No, they're not.
No.
All right. Is there likely to be a period where TV stations are still broadcasting on their original channel and testing on their new assigned channel?
That's a good question. Are they making a cold cutover? Or?
The commission said there would be some flexibility there in certain circumstances, and also that they would allow temporary operation, but there's some pretty strong conditions on it in terms of the amount of interference that can be created to other TV channels that are still operating. So I think in most cases they will not be broadcasting simultaneously on multiple channels. For one thing, there's sort of operational problems with doing that because you have to have an antenna site that's capable of that, and you'd have to have multiple transmitters and that sort of thing. What I think the biggest implication is going to be for users, they're going to have to rescan their TVs or their set-top boxes. And of course, the MVPDs, the video distributors, are going to have some configuration issues to deal with there as well. Because we talked earlier a little bit about the fact that some of these stations are going to be actually sharing the same RF channel with another broadcast station. And for the end user, that will be transparent to them because of what's called PSIP, that allows the branding of the station to remain the same regardless of what actual RF channel they're on. But in order to get that channel after it moves, you'll have to rescan.
Right. So it may be Channel 9 now, and it may continue to be known as Channel 9, but that's not necessarily the channel it's actually transmitting on, and the transmit channel is sort of hidden inside your cable box.
The fact of the matter is most TV stations today are already not broadcasting on their original RF channel.
Right.
Back in the day, the RF channel was aligned with the station's branding, and Channel 9 was on RF Channel 9.
Yeah.
That's no longer the case in almost every market.
All right, what else?
Okay, are there any plans to extend the rebate beyond April of 2018? Say a small school district with a lot of microphones, it's going to take them a few years to get them replaced and get that budget.
Extending the rebate. Wait, Todd's got a gun. Todd, put that down.
I would say, right now as we stand here today, we are looking at this as a rebate that is going to end at the end of April of 2018. I suppose we'll have to take a good look at kind of the conditions on the ground at that point and just kind of see how things are moving along with the transition. But right now our plan is to have the program only run 12 months.
Okay. Can a school district that has over 20 buildings running 1 to 20 channels of wireless per building register for a license?
That's an interesting question. They would certainly meet the 50-plus definition. I believe the specific verbiage refers to large venues and AV system providers. I don't think the FCC contemplated schools per se, but I think it's worth a try. I mean, the cost of applying is low. It's $165, so it's a fairly low risk gamble. The worst they can say is no.
Okay. Any plans for Axient digital systems in the VHF bands?
As I said before, we're not initially. We don't have any. It's not part of the initial introduction of Axient Digital. But I think if history's been any indication, it's probably something that we're going to continue to look at. So stay tuned.
Okay. A question here about, could you please reiterate or re-show the website, where to find the website for the post-auction technical parameters list?
Yes, right there. That should be it. That link in the yellow there.
Okay.
Is where you can go, and that'll take you right to the incentive auction page. It's got all the juicy stuff.
Okay. Next question. We use several RF systems throughout the U.S. for trade shows. What systems should we look for to replace the several units we have?
Boy, that's a good question. I mean, that's a hard one to answer without knowing what systems they have, but if it's trade shows that are going to wander around the country, then the single most valuable feature will be something that has wide tuning range, something like ULXD or even Axient Digital, but something that's ULXD's got, I think it's 10 TV channels, 60 megahertz or even more of tuning range. So that gives you the best option of finding open channels wherever you may go. And probably you definitely want to look into VHF too, because you'll probably find in a lot of the major cities that the VHF channels are underutilized at this point.
Okay. In regards to the rebate, what about production companies that have multiple transmitters per channel? Will they be able to include additional transmitters for additional rebate amounts?
Not as it's currently defined. No, it's we're considering a channel to be one receiver, one transmitter, or in the case of a multi-channel receiver, that corresponding number of transmitters.
So if I have a receiver with a handheld and a body pack, that still counts as one. Really.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Will there be a separate webinar discussing Axient digital systems? And if possible, is it confirmed that Axient Digital will result the existing UHFR and Axient systems discontinued worldwide, not just in the United States?
Ooh, Todd, what do we know about what the future of product replacements here in the U.S. versus other regions?
I don't want to speak out of turn here. I guess I'm going to have to tell you to stay tuned again. I can tell you for the U.S., though, Axient Digital long-term will be replacing both UR and Axient Analog.
Okay. How does the pricing work on the rebate if I move up from a ULXS system to a ULXD system?
So the pricing is contingent upon what you purchase new. So if you're moving into a ULXD system, depending on if it's a single channel receiver, a dual, or a quad, there are some differences in the rebate amount, but it's predicated on what your new purchase is, so it's not tied to what you're sending in.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just sifting through these. We've got a lot of questions, and I just want to say we're not going to get to all of these. We will try to email responses to the ones that we can't answer here today. Also, if you don't get an email response to us and your question is just burning a hole in your brain, send an email to support@shure.com or call our support team, and they can answer a lot of these questions for you. So I just have time for a couple more. Let's see. My goodness, there's a lot of stuff here. So is it safe to say that after these changes, the majority of mobile phones will be operating between 616 and 798 megahertz in general?
I don't think the majority will. No, I mean,
It'll just be one of the bands. I mean, today phones are mostly quad band phones anyway, and they work in a variety of different frequency ranges because as you go from one location to another, the phone has to hop around. So, and obviously, as you could see, not all of the networks participated in the auction, and not all of them bought very much spectrum in certain markets. So this will just be additional capacity.
There's a lot of questions here asking if the slides are available. We don't typically make our slides available, but as I said in the beginning of the webinar, we do record all of these, and it will be available for archive at shure.com/training, also available on our blog. So you can always, probably about a week after today, it'll be available there, and you can always rewatch it or review it there.
right, and especially that one chart that's got, sort of the map of the UHF band with the call-outs for the mobile broadband ranges. I'll make a PDF of that page and get that up on our Incentive Auction Resource Center. And I believe the link for that is shure.com/incentive auction.
Do the rebates apply to Canada?
Good question. Do they apply to Canada?
So the way the rebate program is slated is that we need to have an address within the United States to issue the rebate payment to. So as long as your address is in the U.S., it would be eligible. But we are not. If it's in Canada, we are not. We're not sending payment that way.
All right, that about wraps up our time. No, we didn't get to all the questions, and many apologies for that. But like I said, we will send out a digest with the answers to these questions afterwards. And you can always send an email to support@shure.com or contact our support guys here via phone. We want to thank you so much for joining us. We hope you learned a little bit today. We hope we shed a little bit of light on what's going on, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.